and Belshazzar and Nabonidus were taken off of the throne, nobody was really heartbroken. And it kind of makes sense. Nabonidus wasn't actually acting like a king. He's off running around the country enjoying the day spa. And you saw what Belshazzar was doing, acting like a spoiled little teenager throwing frat parties or something instead of running the government. And in steps this guy. And you're going to see that even though he's a foreigner, there is a drastic difference in the way that he conducts himself. But again, here is another opportunity, and we're going to see over and over and over again in this book how God is in control. So let's start. We're not going to make it all the way through the chapter tonight unless you want to be here till tomorrow, but we'll start with verse 1, and we're probably only going to get through verse 16 this evening. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree, that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captive of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. And these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel, and cast him into the den of lions. And the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, this is a familiar account in the Bible, and even from a wee lad we've been taught that Daniel was in the lion's den. But sometimes we forget that this is an incredible opportunity to reveal character of a man of God. And a man who was not afraid to be used of you in any way, in any time, despite the circumstances. And I trust that as we work through this passage tonight, that your Holy Spirit would touch our hearts with how important it is to have godly character, and how important it is to trust you with the outcomes of decisions that we make based on godly character. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. As we get into this, I want you to see, first off, that we are talking about a man here who has been incredibly faithful. I kind of wondered by this time how old Daniel is, and I was going back trying to add up how long the king served, which is a little difficult because it depends on what calendar you use. You remember months ago when we started Daniel, that some people say there was a discrepancy because Nebuchadnezzar was in his second year of reign when actually he had, just taken over. And it depends upon whose calendar you use. He reigned with his dad for 2 years before he took over by himself. And we're not positive for sure how old Daniel was. At least I'm not settled in my mind how old he was when he was taken captive. But I've come to this conclusion, and I've seen it in 4 or 5 commentaries, so have to be around the ballpark. Daniel's 80 plus years old. Now you think about that for a minute. That's old by today's standards. In biblical times, that's like ancient. Okay? By this time, they don't have nearly the lifespan that a lot of folks do. So here is a man that you would think that would long have passed off the scene, and yet God continues to use him. He has served a long time. Think of the different kings that Daniel has watched come and go, and some of them for very short periods of time. The ones that are mentioned here in Daniel are not all of the kings that Daniel touched. There are some that aren't mentioned in here, like evil Murdoch reigned for a while, and the one feller only 9 months. Can you imagine the turnover and the tragedy that would cause for a wise man? He served without stats. You say, what are stats? Statistics. You think about this for a minute. What would it take to discourage you? Would you be discouraged if you had served a king your whole life and that king never really changed until he was almost dead? That's Nebuchadnezzar. And after you invested an entire, shall we say, lifetime in this king, and you have served him faithfully, and you have had an excellent testimony, when his son takes over the throne, he's a tragedy, and when his grandson takes over the throne, he doesn't even know who you are. Imagine the evil kings that have popped up in between that aren't even mentioned. Daniel obviously didn't have much effect on them. Think of it this way. Israel's still in bondage. He has been his whole life a faithful servant, and Israel is still slaves to Babylon, serving under this empire, and then they're getting ready to be incorporated into the Medes and the Persians. In fact, the spiritual nature of the people of Israel has gone way downhill. And in a little while after Daniel, when a new king steps on and says, hey, I'm going to allow you to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, so many people are comfortable living in Babylon with the lifestyle of the Babylonians, they can't even hardly get up a posse to head back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. They have become completely complacent spiritually. In the midst of all this, we have this incredible commentary on the life of a man who is 80 plus years old. A couple things I want you to see tonight that I think are really important. The first one, be valuable. Be valuable. Verses 1, 2, and 3. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was the first, that the princes might give accounts to them, and that the king should have no damage. The circumstances, there's a new king in town, which means there's a new government, which means new laws, which means a restructuring of how things work. And he has decided that he is going to set up 120 princes over the whole province. And these 120 princes are going to report to 3 presidents. And the 3 presidents, there's one that's the head honcho, and then the other 2 that help him. And the head honcho is this 80-plus-year-old man, Daniel. Now think about it for just a minute. How many of the Medes and Persians' friends do you think thought they were going to be the head honcho when Babylon fell? I mean, we see this every 4 years or every 8 years when there's an election, right? As soon as we change a president, whichever party takes power, all the people that helped him get there, they're waiting to fill cabinet positions, and they're waiting, it's time for a little payback. Let's, grease the hands that helped you get there. We see it all over the world. It was worse during this time period. So you have folks, and some people are confused by Darius because history tells us that Cyrus is actually the one who conquered Babylon. So there's a little confusion as to whether Darius was was a man who was put in charge of Babylon until Cyrus could get there, because Cyrus is waging war somewhere else at this time period. So they actually had two armies doing their thing at this time period. One of them took on the city of Babylon, and the other was off running around. So many believe that Darius is actually like an ambassador of Cyrus. Other people say no, that was another name for him, like Caesar Augustus. His name wasn't Caesar. Caesar Augustus had another name as well. To me, it really doesn't matter. I know the man had friends, and I know that now you have this rich, powerful, incredible Babylonian empire that is now yours, and there are all kinds of friends who are lining up to take that job. And then you have this guy who was former administration. He was third in command under Belshazzar, who was second in command, at least when you took the city. And it probably took a little explaining and a little figuring out to do that Daniel actually only held that position for a matter of hours. Remember, it was an evening party. And by the next morning, they have already conquered the city. And so while Belshazzar promoted Daniel and gave him this authority and gave him his position and his little gold necklace and everything that he did for him, it was actually a matter of hours that he had that prestigious honor. The rest of the time under Belshazzar, he is unheard of. Now look at the criteria, because this is really important. Darius gets these guys, and the reason that he wants to do this is found at the end of verse 2. It says, and the king should have no damage. You say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, there's three things that are going on here. Number one, these guys lived off of taxes. When you conquered someone, you collected taxes from them. Now, if you want to know how important this relationship could be, all you have to do is look at Rome in the time of Jesus' birth. Probably the most hated people on the planet at that time were the Roman tax collectors. Rome would tell them how much taxes they wanted to collect, and they could make up whatever figure they wanted, and people had to pay it because the Roman authorities stood behind them. So these guys got filthy rich because they were bilking everybody. If Rome said, I want $1,000 taxes from everybody, they'd go out and say, Rome says you have to pay $1,200 in taxes. And they were just raking money in head over heels. Well, it didn't set well with the Jewish people, and they didn't like it very much. Darius comes in and says, wait a second, I'm the new king. I can't have people getting all upset at me if this is the way government is run. And all of these folks from this administration could get together and could be siphoning off taxes, and I'd never know it. Can't run my armies, and I can't run my kingdom that way. Second thing, he doesn't want to be unpopular because of failed leadership. You want to see the people get really upset, have the rulers and the judges and stuff be corrupt, right? You want to feel like when you go to court that you're represented fairly and that you stand a fair trial. And so the people that you put in positions of leadership have to be taking care of the people and have to actually be doing their governmental jobs, or you run in problem. And thirdly, he's the new sheriff in town. What happens if all of the administrators decide they don't like this guy, and this is a well-fortified city, so if we get the right folks in control here, we could just have a military coup, or we could have a rebellion on our hands, and now you're back outside the city walls fighting all over again. So here comes Darius, and in stark contrast to Belshazzar, he's really paying attention. Now he's looking for a president to run the place. Look at what it says in verse 3. Then this Daniel was preferred, that's interesting, above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit, that's interesting, was in him. And here we see the character of Daniel, and that's why I say be valuable. He was a capable, qualified, loyal, faithful, honest, 80-year-old man. This guy's probably in semi-retirement. And Darius comes in, and he's surveying all the wise men, and he's looking at all the governmental leaders that are going on, and he sees this old man who's ready to retire, and he says, oh no, not yet. No, I need you. And so he basically brings him out of retirement. Now, remember the contrast again, because Belshazzar sees the writing on the wall and he's scared to death, and he has to be reminded that there is a man in his kingdom who has an excellent spirit. Isn't that interesting? But here you have a foreigner who comes into the city, and in no time flat, he knows who's who, and he knows how valuable Daniel is, and he's not about to let him go into retirement. So while Belshazzar doesn't even know who Daniel is, Darius sought him out. He is way too valuable to not be included in my government. So before we move on to the second point, let me ask you this question. This is the question I've been asking myself. If God needed one person for a really big job, would it be me? Regardless of the situation or circumstance. If God absolutely needed somebody for a huge, life-changing job, would it be me? Second thing I want you to see, be viewable. You say, viewable, are you kidding me? Look at verse 4 and 5. Then the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel. Someone is always watching. Someone's always watching. And you talk about peer pressure. What does it say? The presidents, there's two of them, besides Daniel, and the princes, there's how many of them? 120 of them. You talk about peer pressure? How about 122 to 1? What kind of a work environment would it be if you walked around every day and you knew that 122 people were trying to find a way to trip you up? Boy, you talk about pressure. But not if you just do what you've always done, because what you've always done has been impeccably honest and faithful and above board. 122 people have it out for him. You know, it doesn't really matter if it's one person or if it's 120 or 150 or 5 million. They're gonna keep harping. And I would imagine that of these 122 people, they were probably not united in the problem that they had with Daniel. But I can tell you this, they were united by the person. It doesn't matter if it's envy. It doesn't matter if they were trying to steal money from the taxes and they couldn't while Daniel was watching because he's crunching the numbers on his abacus and figuring out, wait a minute, there's some money missing here. Doesn't matter if there was accountability and they didn't like accountability either for their time or what they were doing or what they were saying. Doesn't matter. All we know is that all 122 of them were united in one thing. They didn't like Daniel. But look at this statement here. They could find none occasion nor fault. Wow. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Now, those two words are very interesting. In other words, what they're saying is they tried to find an occasion. They tried to find something that happened in their past. Now, this happens with every president we've had. It happens with all the congressmen we've had. Whoever's in power, somebody's got to go digging through the closet and find something and make this big thing. They forget about, a couple of years ago, their party or their people or whatever were involved with just as bad. It's all bad. It shouldn't be happening to anyone. Could you imagine if we had a politician, I prefer the term statesman, that actually didn't have skeletons in their closet? Could you imagine BNN, Babylonian News Network? They are running around desperately trying to find something that they can bust on the evening news for Daniel, and they can't find a single incident. These two words, error means mistake, fault means crime. So basically what they said here is, neither was there any error, he has not made a mistake that we can find, or crime found in him. Which is probably why the 123 people were appointed in the first place. Because I'm going to guess under Belshazzar, there were a lot of mistakes being made and there were a lot of crimes going on. Kind of like Chicago politics. And so Darius comes in and he says, I'm going to clean house. And Daniel, you're going to be in charge of it. And things are running the way Darius wants them to under Daniel, but nobody else can stand it. So what are they going to do? They're going to make him choose between God and government. Isn't that interesting? That is interesting to me, that you can't find fault with anybody. So instead of holding him up on a pedestal and saying, man, we ought to start naming all our little kids Daniel. Instead, they're going to try and bring him down, and they're going to try and make him choose between God and government. It's in verse 5. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Be invariable. Be invariable. Don't change. Verses 6 through 13. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and they said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. Be careful when people are buttering you up. Now I want you to listen very carefully to verse 7. You ready? All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute. Is that true? Save one. Oh, we just left out that little part, Here is my first thing under be invariable. Darius gets himself in trouble here because he is not thorough and he is not knowledgeable. He thinks he has everything under control. He has found a man of integrity. He is running the government. Everything is going well. There is no harm to the king. Everything is just panning out beautifully. But the first question he should have asked is it true? Did all the rulers agree? Because Daniel is distinctly missing. And shouldn't their alarm bells be going off in the back of his head? I mean, if he was worried about the previous administration and you want to find somebody who's honest to keep everything working properly, then why wouldn't you go and ask that man before you made such an important decision? Second thing I want to ask you, is it good? They come up with this wonderful sounding thing that they are going to send to the king. And look what it says. You have to make this firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Is it good? This new law that they're asking to be made, is it a good law? Question. What good does this accomplish? How does this better serve the Babylonian Empire, which is now the Medo and Persian Empire? How does this improve the city? How does this improve the nation? How does this improve anyone? What does this accomplish? Let's flip the coin. What evil does it eliminate? Maybe it doesn't accomplish anything good, but it simply eliminates some evil. So what evil does it eliminate? Next question I would be asking, is it self-serving? They're buttering up the king. You walk in there, oh, king, live forever. Common greeting, got to get on his good side when you walk through the door. Nobody can ask a petition of any god or any man for 30 days except you, O king, or we're going to cast him into the den of lions. It makes the king feel good. But shouldn't he have been asking if there's an ulterior motive? I mean, everything's been running well in the land. So why this law? Why do we have to pass this? What changes in the kingdom when we pass this law? Except for there's a possibility we're chucking people to the lions. I'm thinking that if you're going to go chucking people to the lions, it ought to be a pretty severe thing. Is there rebellion going on? Is somebody stealing from the king? What's happening that we're throwing people to the lions? Simply because they're asking, they're praying to somebody else besides me? We're going to chuck somebody to the lions for that? You realize how much this limits business and normal life? Let me show you something that you may not have paid much attention to. Because I got to be honest with you, I've studied this passage several times. And until this week, I never really paid a whole lot of attention to one little phrase. You ready? Whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days. Emphasis added by me. So if there's a beggar sitting on the street and he asks you for alms for 30 days, you have to do what? You got to chuck him in the lion's den. He petitioned you. Some kid's running around and he's hungry, and somebody's sitting there, hey, mister, can I have some of your bread? Chuck the kid to the lions. He just petitioned someone other than the king for 30 days. Do you see how crazy this is when you actually think it through? But is Darius thinking it through? No, he's all buttered up. Okay, new king in town, we're going to promote. All right, that sounds good. So for 30 days, we are going to do this thing. But I have one more question for you here. Why is there such a big push for this powerful law for 1 month? Do you see what these folks do? Go back to verse 7 in the middle. It says, they have consulted together to establish a royal statute. Do you see the strength of the language? And to make a firm decree. Verse 8, now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which what? The law of the Medes and the Persians says when the king writes out a command and he seals it with his signet, it's done. It's as if the God spoke, wrote in stone. Nothing changes. No one can change it. You can't take it back. It was supposed to be so that when you worked out government and you came down to an excellent law, it couldn't just be changed on a whim, kind of like our Constitution. That's free. But can I ask you, when our founding fathers sat down and they're starting this country and they spend a year hammering out the words of the Constitution, fighting for months over a phrase, and nowadays we rush through bills, spending bills, Obamacare, how many thousands of pages? And they come up with them in days, and people vote on it, and they haven't even read it. Do you see why it was such a... Can I ask you a question? We found out why the rush for Obamacare, right? We find out after the fact the rush for some of these spending bills when all of a sudden you see all this other stuff that's added in, and sane people say, wait a minute, that's stupid. Why are we wasting money when we have a national debt? Why isn't the king saying, wait, whoa. We're chucking somebody to the lions for this all-fired important 30-day law? 30-day law? Doesn't that seem crazy to you too? A 30-day law with a death sentence. And nobody thinks it's a big deal. Be consistent. Be consistent. Look at verse 9. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing in the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he did what? He did what he's always done. The same habit of godliness no matter what happens. The same boldness that he faced when Nebuchadnezzar had the dreams and he walked in there and he said, I wish I was telling your enemy this, because you're going to be running around there like a wild animal, and your hair is going to grow and your fingernails are going to grow and you're going to lose your kingdom and you're going to be a wreck. I wish I wasn't telling you this, but I'm telling you because it's for your own good. Same boldness when he walks into Belshazzar and Belshazzar sees the writing on the wall. And he walks in there and he says, you know what? You can keep your gifts and you can give your honor to another. And he boldly just stands there and says, I'm telling you, your kingdom's being taken from you. And it's being taken from you tonight. The exact same boldness, Daniel hears that this decree has been signed, and with reckless abandon, like he has done every single day since he was carried out of captivity, he goes up to his room, wherever that may be, and he opens his window toward the east because he wants to face Jerusalem. He hasn't forgotten about the homeland. And he gets down on his knees and he prays.